vessels, holy and whole, broken, needing no one, open, body and soul, healer come. We continue our Lenten season of recovery as we focus on health as essential to our spiritual lives. Those who collect beach glass often become archaeologists, seeking out any markings or clues as to the story of the original piece. It often takes much time to bring out the truth behind it. This week, we acknowledge the power of truth-telling as a healing property. There are stories that have shaped our lives, leaving us without the ability to see who we truly are in the eyes of God, and leaving us without the ability to speak the depth of our stories of struggle. We focus on the importance of recovery of mental health, reclaiming our sense of who we are, and being able to proclaim new redemptive stories of divine worth. Let us acknowledge our need to restore, repair, renew our holy vessels, and the health of our minds deeply affects our physical and spiritual health. Centering and calming divine breath of God, you gifted us with amazing minds capable of so many things. You gave us the ability to think and feel, imbuing us with discernment of thought and emotion. Like our physical bodies, sometimes this aspect of ourselves is beleaguered. We struggle under the strain of disappointment, despair, and delusion. Too often we hide this. Afraid of what others might think of our difficulties in managing or moving forward, even in the face of devastating circumstances. Too often we perpetuate the stigma of a less than perfect state of mind by shaming ourselves and others. Millennia of misunderstanding compounds our fear. We label and belittle, all the while turning the hatred upon ourselves, for no one is immune from troubles of the mind at some point. So many are suffering now. God, weary and distraught, grieving, and at the end of their rope, we cannot fathom the proportions of loss, and so we look away, sometimes even from the need of our own community. Help us, healer. Show us our capacity for compassion. Forgive our inattention. Move us to move one step at a time toward greater care for one another. In this silence, we sense and acknowledge our yearning for wholeness. Know this, you are accepted, no matter what. Accepting the truth of our difficulties is part of the journey of recovery. Sharing our stories of difficulty can open the way for healing, for you, for me, for all. Let this truth fill you in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. The peace of Christ is with you. There are many contemporary words that are important for us to hear. Maya Angelou has said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." And Kristen Noel has said, "Sharing our truths can provide the opportunity for great healing." Morgan Harper Nichols has shared, "Tell the story of the mountain you climbed. Your words could become a page in someone else's survival guide." Part of the healing process is sharing with other people who care, says Jerry Cantrell. Owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing that we will ever do. Sometimes the most healing thing to do is remind ourselves over and over and over, other people feel this too. From an unknown source, the courage it takes to share your story might be the very thing someone else needs to open their heart to hope. And Kim McManus has shared, your heartache is someone else's hope. If you make it through, somebody else is going to make it through. Tell your story. Hear these words from the Gospel according to Matthew. As Jesus went on from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying loudly, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." When he entered the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus asked them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" And they said to him, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." And their eyes were opened. Then Jesus sternly ordered them, "See that no one knows of this." But they went away and spread the news. They told about him throughout the district. After they had gone away, a demoniac who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the one who had been mute spoke. And the crowds were amazed and said, "Never has anything like this been seen in Israel." The title of the sermon this morning is, "And Sometimes I Worry About You." This week we are considering wholeness in relationship to mental health. I am not a psychology expert, and while I am interested in mental health issues, I know my limitations. For the lay person, the range of mental issues is vast. You've heard the words dementia, Alzheimer's, chemical imbalances, addiction, schizophrenia, depression, and many more fancy labels. A saying that I've been known to quote in its modern form is, "Everyone is insane except you and me, and I'm beginning to worry about you." I understand that the social reformer Robert Owen, who lived from 1771 to 1858, is supposed to have said, "All the world is queer save thee and me, and even thou art a little queer." In 1828, he spoke these words to his business partner, William Allen. They had both been involved in setting up the model industrial community, New Landmark. But increasing friction between the two led to Owen pulling out of this project. According to the internet, official mental health has several categories. Anxiety disorders, including panic disorders and obsessive compulsive disorder and phobias, number 1. Number 2, depression, bipolar disorder, and other mood disorders. Then there's eating disorders and personality disorders and post-traumatic stress disorder. Finally, there's psychotic disorders, including schizophrenia. So beginning with phobias, I confess, I am afraid of heights. When we visited our daughter in Haley, Idaho, she blithely drove the mountain highways for the view. And I studiously talked to her 3-year-old son in the back seat, thereby allowing myself to avoid the precipitous drops on the roadside. I can list any number of high places I avoid. Anxiety and depression have been the experiences of the year for persons of all ages. Even this morning, I was hearing that school children have experienced depression and anxiety because they've been isolated by the COVID precautions. One of the privileges of pastoral life is the opportunity to walk alongside people who have been deeply afflicted and see them overcome mental health issues. I've been with those who voluntarily and involuntarily have committed themselves for short stays. One of Jerry's sons is institutionalized for schizophrenia, and one of my favorite persons who knew she needed help when she became aware of her childhood sexual abuse now writes about her experiences in both prose and poetry, which is worth publication. In fact, in those years, it was the time when churches were just beginning to get computers, and our church had a new computer. It was treated like a holy artifact. Who could touch the computer? Well, the pastor said that this young woman could touch the computer so that she could write out these stories and share them. The word crazy is used as an adjective, a noun, and an adverb in our culture. And it has both positive and negative ways of interpretation, according to the dictionary. On the negative side, crazy means mentally deranged, especially as a manifestation of wild or aggressive behavior. There are 70 synonyms, including loony and batty and stark raving mad, listed in the dictionary. On the positive side, crazy can be used to mean something very enthusiastic or passionate, excited. There's 17 positive uses of the word crazy. I'm just crazy about you. And then there are other uses. And I have to say the spectrum of human emotions is broad, and the range of personalities that society accepts is a goodly portion of that spectrum. However, today, we seldom consider the person with mental health issues possessed. And that is number 71 in the synonym list. But it is the one that fits this passage from Matthew the best. 3 people were healed in the passage from Matthew. 2 blind men and 1 person who was mute. These appear to be physical conditions according to our medical understanding today. But all 3 were possessed in the understanding of Jesus' time. The blind men were considered possessed by the punishment for sin or their parents' sin. And the 3rd man was identified as demon-possessed. Some mental health issues are due to physical manifestations, but others are clearly the result of trauma, like PTSD, due to wartime experiences or personal and situational abuse. Sometimes I worry about you. Not because you're crazy, but because the world treats people so harshly. Sometimes I worry. One of the experiences I had in my mid-30s going into ministry was to listen to people share the experiences of their childhood or their life. People have been afflicted in so many ways. I have been very fortunate. So indeed, there are days that I worry about each one of us. Not because we're crazy, but because the world treats people so harshly. Jesus was able to move people beyond their emotional and physical roadblocks to reintegrated physical and emotional wholeness. I was a teacher for several years, and the students with special learning accommodations had what was referred to as an IEP, an individual education plan to accommodate different learning modes and needs. I subscribe to the theory that in reality we all need an IEP because we all have unique pathways to effective education, both in the system designated for education and in the world. The path to wholeness often includes the ability to see light at the end of the tunnel and involves telling the story. You know, we talk about people at the moment of their death or near death, and we ask, did you see a light at the end of the tunnel? Well, the emotional needs of our day are like little deaths. We are blinded by the emotion that we experience. We are blinded and become unable to cope so many times. And we need to see light at the end of the tunnel, like the blind man did for the first time when his eyesight was restored. Too long, people with fragile mental health were discounted or hidden away. Perhaps in your literature class you remember some of the famous stories of the wife that had gone mad being hidden in the tower while her spouse continued to function in the world. It was not a rare occasion. Persons who were blind and deaf were in need of liberation from the stereotyping of society as less intelligent. The story of Anne Sullivan liberating Helen Keller strikes a resounding chord as the world is enlightened to the depth of Helen Keller's abilities and contributions to society. Since the 1980s, persons in need of mental health treatment and counseling have too often been the same people who do not have health insurance and who fall below the safety net of society. Institutionalizing a long history of providing for the widow and the children, the church and other nonprofits were the only place where the sacred worth of all persons was honored. Prisons are not the places for people who ought to receive medical assistance for mental health issues. People who are depressed, who are addicted to behaviors or substances, and people who need a job they can succeed at all need assistance, not criminal charges. I have mentioned a book by Wilson about the healings in the Gospel of Matthew. Wilson wants us to notice the agency that the disabled persons have in this story in the Gospel of Matthew. These men are not one-dimensional characters. The two men followed Jesus before they were healed. They knew Jesus through some means other than sight. They had prophetic vision. And it isn't until after they are healed that they disobey Jesus by telling their story. Wilson writes, a certain irony presents itself then insofar as the two men can be understood to signify discipleship more effectively before they are healed than after they are healed. The men in the story could not be silent. They had to share with their community the wondrous thing that had occurred. And we usually appreciate them for their evangelistic zeal. Their truth is bigger than this one instance. The healing narratives in Matthew represent a bigger truth. The truth that God in Jesus has come to heal us all, to bring us all out of the shadows and into the light. Because the people who had sight physically had their eyes open to who Jesus was in his miraculous healings. We are all blind to a certain extent. This is a story about individual healing and eschatological deliverance. Our stories, our lives are tangled in the web of God's love. Our truth and our stories liberate us and connect us to one another. This week is about mental health. Some of us have had the experience of pain and brokenness related to others telling stories about us. Remember those wonderful years in junior high when you had to be part of a certain crowd or else you were on the outside? Or maybe people whispering and gossiping because of something they had heard, which might not even have been true. Reclaiming our personal worth in the atmosphere of stories that have been told about us. Telling our own story is an important reaction. There is a new freedom when you can share your own story. And it is so important to change the stigma around mental illness so more people will seek help and embrace the truth of what they are experiencing, and they can find relief. The statistics show that in every congregation, someone, and likely several people, will be dealing with some form of mental illness. This is especially acute in this moment of pandemic unrest. We must be bold in voicing our experience as the church, promising to be a compassionate, non-judgmental, and safe space. What can we do to become this kind of community? This week we acknowledge the power of truth-telling as a healing property. There are stories that have shaped our lives, leaving us without the ability to see who we truly are in the eyes of God, and leaving us without the ability to speak the depth of our stories of struggle. We focus on the importance of recovery of mental health, reclaiming our sense of who we are, and being able to proclaim new redemptive stories of divine worth.